This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israelis prepare for national elections. Who will be Israel's next prime minister? We'll have a report and analysis. Plus, ISIS exposed. CBN's Eric Steckelbeck talks about his new book on the Islamic State. And a barefoot runner runs in the footsteps of Jesus through the streets of Jerusalem. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Within days, Israelis go to the polls to choose their next government. CBN senior editor John Wagi examines the polls and pundits in one of the most pivotal elections in Israel's recent history.
In an election that features 26 parties, even the pollsters are confused.
If you will ask you who's going to be the next prime minister, I'm going to tell you I don't know.
We do know that the next prime minister is likely to be Benjamin Netanyahu or Labor Party leader Isaac Herzog. Either man could be asked to form a government after next Tuesday. In recent elections, a whopping one-third of voters decided in the last 48 hours. 18% say they're undecided this year. Netanyahu is now Israel's second longest-serving prime minister. If he wins another term, he would almost pass Israel's founder and national icon David Ben-Gurion. And that's just one of the reasons his political enemies, both here and around the world, are desperate to stop him. Last weekend in Tel Aviv, tens of thousands of Israeli leftists gathered for an anyone but Bibi rally. Strengthened by strong financial support from overseas and the blessing of Israeli and foreign media, some of Netanyahu's opponents call him a bigger danger to the world than Iran. They accuse him of poisoning the relationship with the United States and hurting Israel's economy. David Parsons of the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem has closely followed the past 8 national elections.
There's been this attempt to create things are collapsing with Bibi in office, this impression that the country's falling apart and we got to get rid of him.
Still, with some polls showing Netanyahu's Likud party trailing, nearly every poll shows voters prefer him as prime minister to Herzog, who heads a coalition of the left. Rafi Smith says that because Israelis don't have hope for an Arab peace partner, they've turned inward to look at issues like the high cost of food and housing.
There's total distrust with the Arabs here. Okay, the Arab factor, everybody sees everybody around it, they don't like us, we have no partner, we have nothing to go, no one to talk to. So let's go inside to more internal problems.
In the closing days, though, voters may return to security concerns. Even most of Netanyahu's opponents don't refute the threat to Israel's existence posed by Iran and radical jihadists. Parsons says it's a critical time for Christians everywhere to pray for Israel.
We can pray, Lord, let your man rise to power in here, the one that you want to lead Israel over coming years, because this is a very momentous time, especially with the Iranian nuclear threat looming. We need Christians all over the world praying for this nation.
John Wagi, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Joining me to talk more about the elections in our studio are John Wagi and CBN correspondent Julie Stahl. John, first to you, to follow up on David Parsons' point, how are Christians praying about this elections and looking at it?
Well, I think ever since the time of Purim, when we talked about the story of Esther and the attack from Persia, now Iran, on Israel, I think that a lot of people are concerned about the security of Israel, and Benjamin Netanyahu made a powerful speech before Congress. And so I think the Christians' prayer is that Israel will be protected in this time of great danger from ISIS, from Iran, from all these threats that threaten Americans as well. And Netanyahu speaks about them more clearly than any world leader on the public stage today. And so they're praying, I think, that he'll be restored to office, basically.
Julie, it can be very complicated looking from the outside of the electoral politics here in Israel. One of the significant developments is what's called the joint list. Can you explain what that is and why it's so significant?
Yeah, the Arab parties have banded together. That's 3 Arab parties plus the Hadash party, which is the communist party of left-wing Jews and Arabs. And they've banded together so they have a large voting bloc. Now, what that's going to mean in this election is if the left wing are asked to form a government, that would be Yitzhak Herzog and Tzipi Livni, if they're asked to form a government, they wouldn't be able to put enough seats together, more than the 60 seats. But the joint list would give them a voting safety net, so that in issues like the so-called peace process, they would vote in favor of it, enabling things that maybe might not be so good for Israel to pass the Knesset.
Right. Well, it's a big development. And John and Julie, both, what's at stake at this election? John, you first.
Well, I think in some ways, believe it or not, it's a referendum on Barack Obama. I think that if the left is restored to power in Israel, I believe that you'll see a huge push to reestablish the peace process and force Israel to make concessions on housing freezes and land concessions to the Palestinians, and maybe even definition of final borders between Israel and a Palestinian state. Wow. There's a lot at stake.
Yeah, Julie, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that God's in control no matter what. We are praying, we're asking Him for mercy, but it really, the security of Israel is at stake. I think most Israelis see that there are major security concerns here, but a lot just want to kind of ignore it. It's like we've always had security concerns, we always will. So we're just going to focus on ourselves, our internal problems. But I think we have to remember who's really in control.
That's right. Well, John, Julie, thank you. A lot at stake, and a lot of people are praying for what's happening in just a few days. Thank you. Well, one of those threats is ISIS and the Islamic State, and as Dale Hurd reports, they got a big boost recently when Boko Haram in Nigeria pledged allegiance to the Islamic State.
Boko Haram's leader announced in an audio message they were swearing allegiance to ISIS. We announce our allegiance to the Caliph of the Muslims. Boko Haram has killed thousands in their home country of Nigeria and kidnapped those hundreds of schoolgirls last year. Experts say this unholy alliance gives both groups more legitimacy and helps in recruiting, funding, and logistics, and it pushes ISIS' goal of establishing a global caliphate. As the influence of ISIS grows, so too are their numbers. Young men and women flocking to join their ranks from around the world. Over the weekend, Australian police detained two brothers, just 16 and 17, suspected of heading to Syria. Where they failed, those three British teenage girls are believed to have succeeded, slipping through Gatwick Airport unchecked before boarding a bus in Turkey for the border. Their families now accusing police of not sharing information that could have stopped them.
If we had known what was going on, we would have prevented it to an extent.
Iraq's prime minister fears that no army in the region can stand in the way of ISIS if they're allowed to continue. Earlier this week, Iraq launched its largest military offensive yet against ISIS in an attempt to retake Tikrit, which was seized by the group last summer.
So the only way to take back the city is not by bombardment, by having troops on the ground.
The prime minister says the ultimate goal is to retake Mosul, which he says could deal a fatal blow to the terror group.
Mosul represent a symbol of their own claimed state. Once we take it back, we would have killed their own ambition.
But ISIS still has true believers throughout the Middle East and around the world, and it looks like for now a growing number of people are being attracted to their radical Islamist ideology. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
CBN News terrorism analyst Eric Steckelbeck released a new book on ISIS called ISIS Exposed. Pat Robertson talked with Steckelbeck about the new book on the 700 Club.
Eric, good to see you again.
Pat, great to be with you.
They went to Belgium, they've gone to France, they've gone to Great Britain. Are they coming here?
Pat, not only are they coming here, they are here.
All right.
The FBI director last month made a really stunning statement, Pat, and he said, right now, in all 50 U.S. states, we have active investigations, ISIS-related investigations. Even in Hawaii and Alaska, we have ISIS-related activity. So they are here. That's number one.
We have forsaken our founding principles. We won't stand up for them. You know, it's interesting that they've got a Sharia court now in Texas. You think, what is wrong with Texas?
There's really two tracks to this global jihadist threat we're facing. Number one, you obviously have the ISIS threat, the violent jihadists. We know what they want. Mm-hmm. Then you have kind of this subtle, stealthy jihad where they're getting jobs in the media, the government, academia. They're starting Sharia courts. They wear suits and ties, very reasonable fellows, they seem like. Mm. But they are just as dangerous, in my view, Pat, because at the end of the day, the tactics may differ between, say, ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood, but But at the end of the day, the end game is the same. That caliphate and Sharia law for one and all, whether we like it or not.
Actually, the Muslim Brotherhood, they have introduced them into the White House, and they've come in for major policy meetings and lunches and dinners and so forth. What's the story?
Absolutely, Pat. I think we've detailed it here in the 700 Club more than any program in America. We've really gotten in detail on the Muslim Brotherhood infiltration of this administration. And basically, we have Muslim Brotherhood-connected individuals who are advising this president on his counterterrorism policy. This is the epitome of the fox guarding the henhouse. You have people who want the same thing as ISIS. That's the key point, Pat. Maybe they're not going around beheading people yet, but at the end of the day, they want the same thing as ISIS. And what do they want, Pat? In the book, I detail Al-Qaeda's 20-year plan. This is stunning. In the year 2000, Al-Qaeda put together a document saying this is our outlook for the next 20 years, ending in 2020. It's a 7-phased plan, Pat. Right now, we're in the 5th phase. Al-Qaeda said between 2012 and 2016, they wanted to establish a caliphate. Well, they did exactly that last year. Now, the next phase, 2016 to 2020, is total confrontation.
So this is an outline. They're working against the plan, and we're ignoring it.
Pat, it's all right there. They have laid out their plan. This is what we're planning to do, and they're on their way. They're winning. They are winning this global war that we're in right now.
ISIS exposed. Eric Stackelbook's new book that'll tell you the inside word. You need to have it to be informed. Eric, God bless you, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Coming up, the victims of Boko Haram. Christians speak out on the horrors of being captured by the radical Islamic group. Welcome back. Boko Haram has killed more than 10,000 Nigerians in their brutal campaign to establish a caliphate in West Africa. George Thomas reports on how some Christians have suffered there and one man's mission to heal broken hearts.
With every kidnapping or attack, this young Nigerian relives the nightmare of weeks spent under Boko Haram's control.
We asked them repeatedly why they are doing what they're doing. They told us this is an all-out battle against Christians and Muslims.
On August 22, 2014, Stephen witnessed the sheer brutality of Africa's deadliest terror group.
We were working on the farm when Boko Haram attacked us.
It happened in Gwoza, 550 miles from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. Hundreds of Islamic fighters stormed Stephen's town.
It was well coordinated. They attacked in huge numbers, going from house to house, stealing, destroying, then capturing men, women, and children.
This is video of the assault put on YouTube by Boko Haram.
They attacked Gwoza because it is predominantly a Christian town.
Several hundred people were killed, including members of Stephen's family.
I saw them kill my father and brother. After the killings, they took 11 of us hostage.
Stephen asked CBN News to mask his face to protect himself and his family. He said the attack went on for several hours. 2 days later, Boko Haram's leader released this video declaring the Gwoza operation as the beginning of an Islamic caliphate in northeast Nigeria.
Thanks be to Allah, who gave victory to our brethren in Gwoza and made it part of the Islamic Caliphate. We did not do it on our own. Allah used us to capture Gwoza. Allah is going to use Islam to rule Gwoza, Nigeria, and the whole world.
Stephen was held by Boko Haram for months and says he saw their brutality up close.
We watched them carry out their evil atrocities from one town to another. Each time they went on an operation, they would usually chant Allahu Akbar, and this terrified us. They'd return from the attacks with dozens of prisoners and stolen items. The men guarding us always came around to question us whether we were ready to be part of Boko Haram.
Meanwhile, in another part of town,
they asked me if I wanted to be beheaded or shot in the head. I told them I'd rather be shot. They said no, they would rather slaughter me instead.
We've taken similar precaution to hide Elizabeth's identity. Like Stephen, Elizabeth is a Christian. She and her family were trying to escape Gwoza when they were intercepted by Boko Haram fighters.
They stopped our car and ordered us to convert to Islam. We refused. Then they shot my siblings behind me. My husband was ordered to leave. He fled into the bush and then they told me to get into their car.
Elizabeth was taken to a nearby town and again asked to convert to Islam. Again, she refused.
I stood my ground, and each time I refused, they put a knife to my neck and threatened to cut my head off.
But after days of torture, no food, and under constant threat of death, she reluctantly agreed to convert. Elizabeth described to CBN News how Boko Haram fighters forced her to undergo an Islamic conversion ceremony. They changed her name, told her to wear a hijab, and married her off to an Islamic fighter. Held against her will, she said she was repeatedly raped by her Muslim husband.
For all the horrible things Boko Haram did to me and my family, I leave them to the judgment of God Almighty.
After several more months of captivity, Stephen and Elizabeth miraculously escaped. The details of their escape are being withheld for security. Both are wanted by Boko Haram. And now both have joined some 2,000 other Christians living in this temporary camp outside the capital city.
And all of a sudden, they have been stripped of all their belongings, and they are living in places that are not their homes at all.
Mark Libdo has helped thousands through his Christian human rights group.
I'm doing this because people need to bring it to limelight. People need to speak about what is happening. If you don't speak about it, it's worse than those who are perpetrating it.
With the help of local churches, Libdo now feeds, clothes, and provides trauma counseling to hundreds of Boko Haram's victims.
There were many times while I was in captivity that I thought if I got hold of a gun, I would have massacred the men who killed my father and brother.
The Nigerian army is conducting military operations to retake areas held by Boko Haram ahead of this month's presidential elections. Nigeria's leader, Goodluck Jonathan, has promised to deal with the terror group.
President Goodluck Jonathan has vowed to crack down on Boko Haram, not necessarily getting rid of them altogether, but creating an environment in his country that is safe and allowing millions of Nigerians to head to the polls.
But Nigerians aren't convinced he can do it. Boko Haram has killed more than 11,000 people in their Islamic quest, and they are promising more bloodshed in the northeast, leaving thousands of vulnerable Christians in their wake. George Thomas, CBN News, Nigeria.
Up next, a little girl's interview goes viral when she forgives ISIS, talks about her faith in God. Welcome back. How do you forgive the people who have devastated your life and left you homeless? Gary Lane talked with one reporter who interviewed a young Iraqi girl who shows us how.
What can you tell us about Miriam? What do you know about her?
Miriam, she's a 10-year-old girl from Iraq. She had been displaced from her place in Karakosh, and now she's living in a mall in Erbil. She was very active at school, and she has a very lovely smile, and most of it, she has a very lovely heart as well.
طيب انت مش بيجيلك وقت كده تبقي زعلانة بتحسي ان يسوع سابك مثلا؟
مرات يعني أبكي على البيت مالتنا، أبكي على قراقوش، بس ما أزعل إنه الله يعني سابنا من قراقوش، يعني رحنا من قراقوش. أشكره لأنه سترنا.
Does she have brothers, sisters, and what did they do in Karakosh?
She only has one sibling, one girl, her sister, Zomorod, and her father and her mother. They educated their children in a very good manners, and she really loves their parents, you know. She loves them in a way that they only teach her how to sing, how to love each other, and we really can feel this amount of burst of love that's coming out of Miriam. They are just modest family, and they are like hundreds others family that come out from their places, displaced by ISIS, and went to live in Erbil.
And what impressed you the most about what she told you?
You can see, Gary, that she has some kind of very deep truth in her voice and in her eyes as well, you know. When you see a 10-year-old girl, and when I thanked her at the end of the interview, she told me, "I thank you, you taught me a lot." And when I asked her, "What did I taught you?" She told me, "You didn't taught me, you just felt for me." Can you imagine, like, 10-year-old girl in this situation, lost everything behind her, and she's just full of hope, and she sings for Jesus.
انت حاسه بايه ناحيه الناس اللي ممكن تبقى خرجتك من البيت وتعبتك؟
ما راح أسويهم ولا شيء، بس يعني أقول لله يسامحهم.
وانت تقدري تسامحيهم كمان؟
أيوه.
بس دي حاجه صعبه قوي ولا حاجه سهله ان انا اعرف اسامح الناس اللي تعبتني يا مريم؟
ما راح أقتلهم، يعني ليه أقتلهم؟ بس زعلانة ليه طلعوني من بيتنا، طلعونا من بيتنا.
I think it's very important for people in the West to know that we need to pray for these kids in order for this single small bit of light to still, shining inside their hearts and minds, and to keep that their souls and their stories as well to go through the whole world, so many people know how much we still have faith, and these kids still have faith in their hearts in spite of all what's going on around them.
وترجعوا كمان في بيت احلى من البيت الاولاني.
كيف الله؟ ما كيفنا نحن، كيف الله هو اللي يعرف.
Thank you, Issam Nagy of Sat7 for joining us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You can find Gary's entire interview and Miriam's song on the Global Lane blog at cbnnews.com. Up next, a barefoot runner takes on the hills of Jerusalem, one of the world's most famous and grueling marathons, and finds fulfillment in running where Jesus walked. Finally this week on Jerusalem Dateline, in just a few years, the Jerusalem Marathon has become one of the most popular in the world, especially for Christians. One of those runners is Rick Raber, who runs barefoot. He told us before the marathon and after what it's like to run through the streets of Jerusalem.
This is a day that the Lord has made, and I'm just going to have a lot of fun and rejoice and just have a good time today. It's running 26.2 miles on holy ground. I feel very glad it's over. Everything came together this year. The weather was beautiful. I just like to say Jerusalem's a wonderful town to run in. If anybody ever gets a chance to come here and run, it's a friendly city. Don't be afraid. God is with you.
Well, if you're a runner, maybe someday you'd like to join the thousands of runners like Rick who traverse the hills of Jerusalem each year. Well, that's it for this edition. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.